Excuse me one second here. All right. A little bit about where this initiative came from. The goal of this work is to develop a strategy to address research on stormwater ponds. Now, the council doesn't do research itself. Many of you do. Better said, this is a strategy on where do we want to make our financial and professional expertise investments on research related to urban stormwater ponds. So for that, we have established what we call a directed research funding pool. So the rationale behind this work is, well, of course, this could be subject to some interpretation and opinion, but stormwater ponds are one of our management practices, and they are the most proliferous practice across the state. We know that research on stormwater ponds is needed, yet when we examine some of our information, we don't know if we have all the priorities established that help us determine where we should best make our investments. This really came to light when we did our 2020 request for research proposals, and we looked at the proposals that we received through the council and the advisory committee. And we received more than $1.1 million in proposals related to urban stormwater ponds alone. That's more than all the research investments we made on the 9 projects you heard about this morning. So we know the need is greater than what we have available. By the way, in the 2020 request for research proposals, we actually received more than $4 million in requests. And so we typically award during a funding cycle somewhere between $1 and $1.2 million in research projects. So what happened in 2020 is the advisory board funded 8 research projects totaling about $900,000. We took the remaining research budget and we set it aside in a dedicated fund for future research on stormwater ponds. And what we said we would do is develop a strategy for where we would like to make these investments in the future. So right now, the Research Council has set aside about $300,000 in our directed research pool on stormwater ponds. Now, the direction of that, the exclusivity of research only on ponds is all what we're talking about right now and is subject to change. I think actually the amount will grow, but that's to be determined in the short future. All right. Another item that I'll just throw out here, don't expect you to read this. I popped this into my slides over lunch, thinking about all the data that we have on stormwater ponds. And I reflected back to some work that I extracted out of the Stormwater Research Roadmap during my work on looking at the qualitative data we had between comments, need for stormwater ponds. And we just have a slurry of information. And what this will show and where we're going with this is we need some additional community work, committee work. We need to dive a little bit deeper into the data we collected on the Stormwater Research Roadmap, which is research priorities. And we have a lot of information about what stakeholders said was needed on urban stormwater ponds. A lit review and additional engagement with stakeholders, which includes all of you. I'll come back to this. So what the committee, the advisory board did is we had several conversations about this during advisory board meetings, which are 20 members strong. And we decided we needed a smaller committee to explore this topic and help us define the direction and where we want to go. So we established a Stormwater Pond Research Subcommittee of the Advisory Board. And those members are highlighted in yellow on your screen or bolded. And so these 9 people, along with myself, have had many meetings now, very lengthy meetings, talking about our research strategy towards stormwater ponds. I've always said, my email, I read my email every day. My phone is always here. My door is always open. please do reach out with me with questions, but always reach out to the advisory board with contributions, especially on these pond topic as we build out this strategy more. All right, I don't expect you to read this slide, but what I wanted you to portray in this is the committee has come up with a long list of actions and steps it can take. And they're in numerical order, but it's not necessarily chronological. I'm going to zoom in on a few of these momentarily and talk about what the committee has completed and where the projects and what the things they're working on right now. But what I wanted you to take away is they developed a long list of possible items that we could do to help us articulate what our research strategy would be on ponds. So I want to talk about the first four because these are the four the committee has accomplished during the last quarter or the last 3 months or so. We had very lengthy conversations about stormwater pond research needs. And part of those conversations were about we must have an agreed upon type of pond we're talking about. And so defining the types of stormwater ponds was critical to the conversation. And so the committee did that first, and we relied on a lot of existing literature. And through various meetings, we decided to whittle down and focus initially in on something called designed and constructed stormwater ponds. And we have some separate documentation about what that might mean. It doesn't mean that the research strategy will only focus on designed and constructed ponds, but initially it provided us a focus on things to look at. The next step the committee embarked on was 3 different items simultaneously. And that was to articulate and define what we wanted or expected designed and constructed stormwater ponds to do. And I'm pleased to say we, after multiple meetings and documents, we've come to a consensus on that. I'll show that momentarily. Then the committee went back to the drawing board and asked themselves 2 things. For designed and constructed stormwater ponds, are they working for what they intended to do, or are they not working? And then the other question is, that's fine for now in the past, but how do we want designed and constructed stormwater ponds to work in the future? So these four tasks is what the committee has been working on, has accomplished just recently. So using the answers to those questions, then the committee examined, well, what are some possible ways that we could use our research funding, our capacity in regards to design and constructed stormwater ponds? One thing we could do is we could invest in research to determine if the 5 functions of a design and construct stormwater pond are working. And by the way, the 5 things that we agreed to for design and constructed ponds is they were designed to do rate control, flood control, capture sediment, capture particles or particulates, and reduce stormwater energy. So we could invest research into deciding, are these designed and constructed ponds doing these things and doing them well? The other question we could examine is we could invest research to determine if they're not working to do those 5 things, why aren't they doing it? The other question is, well, how could they be redesigned or remodified not only to perform those 5 major goals, but a whole list of things that we might not had intended years ago when we put them in the ground, including controlling dissolved phosphorus, provide biological treatment, provide some high quality habitat, aesthetics. What about ponds removing trash, floatables, oil, grease? Can we design them to do even better flood control and rate control, especially related to climate change and changing precipitation patterns? So these are some different ways that we examined the designed and constructed ponds so far. Okay, so using all that information, what the committee did is now try to dove a little bit deeper into, could we develop hypotheses or research questions related to design and constructed ponds? And so we just recently completed an exercise where all the committee members contributed to the answers to these 4 questions. Are designed and constructed stormwater ponds, and they finished the sentence, and so on and so on. Can design and constructed stormwater ponds be better habitat for species? Is there a way that designed and constructed stormwater ponds could remove dissolved phosphorus, and et cetera? So we went through this exercise, and they just recently completed it. So the next steps for the committee is we agreed that the committee needs to continue to work. We've had 5 meetings to date. They've been lengthy. They've been very fruitful discussions. And we have yet as a committee to have a discussion with a full advisory board, which are 20-some. And I know that many of the advisory board members that are not on the committee, this is the first you're hearing about some of the work out of the committee. The committee is actually going to meet tomorrow, and then the advisory board after that, as they are aware of, and we're going to talk more about some of this committee work. So right now, what the committee is doing, again, is articulating these research questions on designed and constructed stormwater ponds. What they have talked about as possible next steps is prioritizing some of those questions or research questions information needs, and then consider some of the other actions that I put on that long list of 12 that I displayed on the screen earlier. Some of the higher priority actions or steps the committee has expressed a high interest in includes completing a literature review. And what we mean by that is we know there has been a lot of research done on stormwater ponds. Some of you have completed that research, and you often end on the final pages of your research project, and we need this information in the future, or this would be the next step in the research. We have yet to compile all those ideas about next research needed on stormwater ponds. We know many of you wrote it. We need it all in one place. So that is one action the committee has considered. The other piece is we know the committee has been talking for many months now. We don't mean for it to be exclusive. We know that we need to have a greater engagement with stakeholders, including researchers, professionals, policymakers, people at the agency level, people who operate and own and manage stormwater ponds at the local level. This is all stakeholder engagement. And so one of the things that we've continually talked about the last couple of months is convening a stormwater pond research symposium. And by the way, I do want to acknowledge a close colleague of mine and many of yours, Claire Blazer, with Riley Purgatory Watershed District. Claire and I have talked multiple times about this. Claire has convened a watershed stormwater pond research meeting every year. And what we're talking about is taking her great work and putting it on steroids and having a Minnesota Stormwater Pond Research Symposium. So that is something that we are currently discussing. And I also want to acknowledge, we've talked about, this is certainly a need for Minnesota, but we know that it has regional and national implications. We also know that we have national and regional colleagues that are working on the same issue. So there has to be some level of engagement with them as well. So we're not overlapping. And we can also take advantage of leveraging different possibilities of resources and expertise. What we would anticipate is stormwater ponds could be its own category in our upcoming RFP. We don't know that for sure. You know, we typically have 2 areas of categories in our RFP: rapid response projects and integrated projects. And some of our pond work has gone into both of those. But we think because of the committee work and the need on stormwater ponds, it could be its own category in the RFP. The other option is we may develop high priority research questions that we want answered right away. And perhaps that will be a separate RFP, a competitive nature, or we might just come up with what we call a directed study, something that needs to be done by a certain team because it is the highest priority research question that needs to be answered on stormwater ponds. So we had hoped by this time this summer, we would have a more thorough research strategy for stormwater ponds at the council level. We're not quite there. We anticipate that we can get there within the next couple months. So my message today is that, we have to stay tuned for additional information. We're going to continue to meet at the committee level, the hopes that we can carve out some more details. The advisory board is going to be talking about this as soon as tomorrow, and we welcome comments and contributions. But I do want to end with, we know that stakeholder engagement with many and all of you is critical in this process, and we are going to see to that. We hope that we can have some type of a get together, other forms of contribution into this strategy in the upcoming month or two. So with that concludes, my comments on where this research strategy is at the moment. I know there are some committee members online here today. I know I put you on the spot. I didn't ask you this before, but any of the committee members want to make any comments about the work that we've been up to and the conversations we've had? All right, not hearing any right now. Any questions from those of you online? You could unmute or ask those in the chat, or comments you want to make about where we're at with stormwater pond research strategy. Okay. Well, I'm not seeing or hearing anyone. So we're going to continue to work on this and see if we can carve out a direction on where the Stormwater Research Council can make their financial investment in research later on this year in regards to designed and constructed stormwater ponds. We really welcome questions or comments you might have that will feed into this, but again, I have to reiterate, we will reach out to you, whether that be in the Stormwater Research Symposium or some other mechanism here in the near future. All right. Well, I will conclude it there at this point. I will stay online if you have additional questions or comments. Otherwise, I really appreciate you coming back and hearing about this specific work with the advisory board for the Minnesota Stormwater Research Council. More will develop here as we continue to work through this during the next month and two. And we'll follow up today's meeting with communications about when the presentations are posted and our new 2021 program report that will be accompanied by our pooled funding request to cities, watersheds, organizations, and private businesses. Thank you all for joining today. Thank you for all the great work that you continue to do with the council and for Minnesota with stormwater. And we look forward to partnering with you and continuing our great work here in the very close future. Have a great day, everyone. Thanks again for joining. Enjoy your Minnesota summer.
Thanks, John.
Thanks, John.
Yes, indeed. Thanks, John.